Alright, so I have a series of labs here, and virtual labs, and what we're going to do is we're going to work through we're not going to work through all of them, but we're going to take a look at three families of plants that they're somewhat problematic in wetlands. And that's why we're not going to go through the whole things, but it's basically an introduction to how, if you had a species in one of these families, how would you go about determining what species it is that you have. And whenever I do this, I have two identification keys that I show students in the class, in my aquatic botany class. The first of these, it's out of a book, Knobel, I think is how the pronunciation is, Knobel, published in 1980, and the name of this book is The Field Guide to Grasses, Sedges, and Rushes of the United States. It's a little small book published by Dover Press, again in 1980. And I showed this to them not because it's awesome, but because it's a really simplified breakdown of some of the differences among these three families, but also because it's somewhat problematic. So there's a really very succinct, very short key, as it were, to distinguish among these three families. So the grasses, sedges, and rushes, the families are, the grasses are the Poaceae, sedges are the Cyperaceae, and the rushes are the Juncaceae. And so the way this key by Knobel goes, and I actually have a specimen that I'm going to go through with that. This is one I used in class actually a week ago when we did the lab, one of these labs. I'm not going to give away which one it was just yet, but anyway, so this is the stem from one of the plants that we used, and I mean, it's seen better days back when it was attached to the plant. But it's kind of interesting. It's got the blades here we would call them scabrous on the edges, so it's have little tiny saw teeth on the edges. You can kind of, if you're not careful, you could cut yourself on these. And then it was, actually when I was standing up before I detached this from the plant, it was actually about this high, and up at the top it had this inflorescence like this that was attached up here at the top, which ribbon, I guess. Now you would kind of be able to see what that looks like. I have it in this bag because this thing is incredibly fuzzy. It falls to pieces really easily. And when we looked at this in the lab, there were pieces of this stuff everywhere. It took quite a while to get it all cleaned up, and they were so dry and light that as you're trying to sweep them off of the lab bench, they would basically just fly up and jump back to the other side of your hand. It took forever to clean. Needed a vacuum cleaner. Anyway, so I had this, and with the class, I went through the first step of this key. And so if you go through this key by Knobel, so seeds are single within each flowering scale. And so I don't know if you can see them here in the video, but there are, it doesn't look like you can really see that. I thought maybe on the white part here you could see there's some tiny little scales in there, and it does turn out there's one seed for each one of those scales. But anyway, so we go through the thing. The first step is, are the seeds single in each flowering scale? And I'll say another thing, because some people may not be familiar with what the heck I'm even doing here. But anyway, so the seeds are single in each flowering scale. Yes, they are. So the next step is the stem hollow. All right, and so if you look at this thing down here, and again, I don't know how easy it is to see, but you can look there, and yeah, the stem is kind of hollow looking. Is the stem rounded? It definitely looks pretty round. Again, if you're looking at it from the end, you can, and this is really difficult to do, but you can kind of see there that it does look kind of round. So it looks round, it looks hollow. Is the stem jointed? And so you look along the stem here, and there's a little, what seems like a bit of a joint there. There's another joint here, and each one of these joints we have this sheath that comes up with a blade coming off of it. Okay, oh, and then they mentioned this sheath. So the sheath of the leaves is open on the backside. Well, and actually it turns out, so if you look at this sheath, so this would be the blade here, and then the sheath is on here, and there actually, you can pick at it, it's entire all the way around here. It's not open. It's not open on either side. So at that point, one would be a little bit puzzled because the first three characters, so the hollow stem, round, jointed, but the leaf sheaths are not open, so maybe you think, oh, okay, well this is just an exception that's not open on the backside. And so all those characteristics tell us that this would be in the grass family, the Poaceae. Well, it actually turns out this species is not in the grass family, in the Poaceae. And so this is one of the reasons I use this little, it's a dichotomous key. Dichotomous refers to, the prefix di refers to two, so you have this this identification key where at each step along the way you have two branches you can take. It's sort of like a, as I mentioned in class the last time we did this, it's kind of like a choose your own ending book. So you get to the end of a page or a section and it says, oh, do you want whatever so-and-so to do this, or do you want them to do that? And you go to page 18 or page 27 or whatever. Okay, so it's kind of like that. So at each point, you basically, almost always, you have two questions. They're basically yes or no questions. So again, were the seeds single in each flowering scale, yes or no? If yes, then you come into this part and you, again, answer a bunch of yes-no questions, and it tells you that, you know, for a vote, if we're taking votes, right, or a score of 3 to 1 suggests this is a grass, when in fact this is not a grass, it's in the sedge family. If we look at the key for the sedges, are the stems solid? On this one, no, they're not. Are the stems mostly triangular or round? Oh, okay, well this one's kind of round, but it's not solid. The stems are not jointed. Well, it is jointed. So it's not solid and it is jointed. Sheath of the leaves closed at the back. So on this one, we're 2 and 2 if we're just counting votes. So with a score of 3 to 1, we grasses, 2 and 2 would be sedges. So basically this little key isn't very good. And the reason for that is with this particular group, and a lot of groups this is the case, is that it relies almost exclusively on what we refer to as vegetative characters. So characters associated with the non-reproductive tissues. And so that's an issue. And, well, that's an issue with certain groups. And once you get to a certain depth in some of these dichotomous keys. And so another key, I'll clean up my mess a little bit. So I have another key that I'm going to use for some of these exercises here. And this one is the aquatic and wetland plants of the southeastern United States, written by Robert Godfrey and Jean Wooten. Jean Wooten used to be in Southern Miss, I believe. Hopefully I got that right. I could look in here and see. But anyway, I think she used to be at Southern Miss down in Hattiesburg. So aquatic and wetland plants of the southeastern United States. And again, you'll note this is the monocot volume. There's another book of slightly greater thickness for the dicots of the southeastern United States. And so this is a really good book if you're dealing with plants that occur in and around wetlands. One note I guess I would make is this was published in 1979. Okay, so it's now, what's that, 41, this is 2020. So it's now 41 years old, and a lot has changed since this book was published. Not so much in terms of the plant species that are here, but in terms of what we call those species and where we put them in terms of what family they're in for organizational purposes. And a lot of that change can be attributed to analyses using DNA. A lot of it can be attributed to greater actual investigations and botanizing in the region where we've found some species that maybe we didn't realize were there. People taking a much closer look and seeing that there are some differences that maybe there's a species, and actually I think one of the ones that we'll look at in the sedge family here, I think this gives us the wrong name on that one based on some conversations with Dr. Charles Bryson. But anyway, this is the book that we're going to be using. So if we wanted to distinguish among these three families, the grasses, sedges, and rushes, using this book, So we would flip over to, so this dichotomous key, and I'll go through some of these in a video later, but basically you go through here and it just has a list of questions here, and you go through there and basically they're yes or no questions. So for example, we have a plant. Is the plant diminutive? So is it a tiny little plant floating on or submerged in the water? That's not the case with any of these things that I have here. So we would say no, and we would go to the next step here that's labeled number 1. Is it a plant with stems and leaves? Are the leaves sometimes scale-like, sometimes reduced to sheaths, etc., but it does have stems and leaves, and so we say yes. And then the next step, is it a marine plant? Well, it's not a marine plant. It came from the edge of a freshwater wetland. So we come to the next one, which says, is it a freshwater plant? Yes, it is. Is the leaf blade large and fan-like? Is it sort of like a palm? No, that's not the case. So the next one says, is the leaf blade not like that? Yes, that is the case. And so anyway, we continue on down through here. Is the stem woody or herbaceous? And they're herbaceous. Is it a floating aquatic? No, it's not. So the next step, is the plant not as described above? Okay. So these yes or no questions, a lot of times they're basically, the first one asks you something and the second one says, is it not? That step up there. And then we get into a section in this key that deals with plants that are aquatic or from wetlands. I think this section deals more with just aquatic species where we don't have reproductive parts. So now we're getting into a part of the key where they recognize that the vegetative characters alone often are not sufficient for doing these identifications. But we do have, so in this bag here we have reproductive structures, so we don't need to use this part at all, so we skip to the next one with the same number. And in here the next step says, is the inflorescence, so that's the cluster of flowers in the thing, is that a very dense brownish spike, 12 to 40 centimeters long, with thousands of minute flowers, which turns out to be the description of cattail. So you think about that long brown hot dog, corn dog looking thing. There are thousands of tiny little brownish flowers, fruit in there. This is not a cattail. So inflorescence, otherwise. Yes, it is otherwise. Are the flowers in a single compact head? No, they're not. Okay, now we're getting to the really good part, because here on the first step of this next one, and keep in mind again, we've been dealing a lot with flowers and reproductive structures, which the key by Knobel, which would work for some species, it just didn't work for this one that I have here. Anyway, we're getting away from vegetative into the flower structures. So flowers in the axils, so that's down like you have a stem and a leaf or a bract or something. The axil is here. So flowers in the axils of chaffy bracts or scales and more or less hidden by them. Usually only the stamens or the styles of the flowers protruding. And that is the case in this one. Although, just looking at it at this kind of scale, that may not be obvious, especially not through a bag with light reflecting off of it. We'll see that later under the microscope. Anyway, so that is the case. They're individually in there, and then we get two steps that distinguish between the grasses and the sedges. Okay, and then actually both of these deal with leaves. So are the leaves what they call two-ranked? So basically one on each side of the stem. The leaf sheaths split on the side opposite the blade. And remember on this one it was not, so that should get us into the next one. So leaves in three ranks, so almost, if you were to look down on the top, coming out and forming sort of a triangle. I don't know, I didn't pay attention to that on this one, but leaf sheaths not split lengthwise, but continuous around the stem, and that was the case on this. And so given that set of characteristics, that tells us that this would be the Cyperaceae, which is the sedge family, which is where this belongs. And we would go to, in this particular key, we would go to page 238 and continue from there. For the rushes, if we go back to the Knobel key, and so I did, I got us both to the grasses and the sedges there. if we go back to the key by Knobel, so we had seeds single in each flowering scale, and you have to know ahead of time with this Knobel key that the thing you have is either a grass, a sedge, or a brush. All right. So are the seeds single in each flowering scale? And with a rush, the answer to that is no, they're not. So then it says, are the seeds several in each pouch? Kind of implies there is a pouch of some sort that has seeds in it. And in fact, if you have a rush, you would have, you don't really call it a pouch, but a capsule. And inside that capsule, you would see either three, or, I mean, assuming all of the ovules are fertilized and you actually get seeds, you would have 3 seeds, or you would have a ton of seeds, with approximately 1/3 of a ton of seeds in each of 3 compartments inside that capsule. And so looking at that, you would know you were in the Juncaceae family. And in this particular key, if we go past that point there, where we were in the grasses or sedges, we have steps that deal with the flowers not being as described above. Are the plants aquatic? In this case, the rushes I'm thinking of, no, they're not. Is the perianth absent, or is it in the form of bristles or scales? So the perianth, if you recall from any botany classes or whatever, intro biology, so you in a flower you have the pistil, so that contains the quote female structures. Well, actually, it does contain the female structures. So the ovule, the ovary, and the ovule and everything is inside the pistil. And then outside that, you have the structures that will produce the pollen. So the stamens, and the filament, and then the anther sitting at the top. Anther is a key term here. So outside that, so peri meaning outside, anth meaning anther, so perianther. So outside that, you have the thing called the perianth. Usually in flowers, we think of that as being the petals. And then maybe outside the petals, we have some green things called sepals. Okay, so in some species, they don't really have petals. Okay, so we refer to the perianth consisting of bristles or scales, and those parts not appearing petal-like in color or in texture. And that's the case for the rushes. They actually have what would be the petals and what would be the sepals all basically look the same. They're greenish scale-like structures outside the I guess the reproductive parts of the flower there. And then there's some additional questions, and eventually you get down to so the inflorescence, the cluster flowers, is not a spadix, which is the thing you see in things in the arums, where you have a spathe and then you have a spadix sitting inside it. They don't look like that. So it's not a spathe and spadix. They're not in globose, so globe-like, unisexual heads. So that they do have little roundish clusters of flowers. They won't be unisexual. They'll actually be bisexual. They'll have both pistils and stamens in them. And then basically you have this carpels that have 3 sections in them, and you have either 3 or a ton of seeds, and that puts you in the Juncaceae, so the rush family. And so in the next few videos that I'm going to do, I'm going to look individually at some representatives of each of those families and go through some keys out of this book here, and look at how we distinguish among some of these things, and keeping in mind there are thousands upon thousands of species in each of these families. So we're only going to take a few just to give an idea of how do you use one of these keys, what are some of the important characters that you look at when you're attempting to identify species in these families, and just give an appreciation for some of the diversity of these things in wetland habitats.